Okay, so again, thanks for having me for the presentation tonight. Again, my name is Craig Sufall. I'm the Extension Program Leader and Specialist here in the Department of Poultry Science in College Station. Um, the picture here, the opening slide there is a picture of my two boys. Well, several years ago. They're much bigger now. Boy, they grow fast. Kind of like chickens, they grow really fast. And so this was a kind of a picture that looks about like 3 or 4 years ago when we kind of first got started with raising show poultry. I grew, show birds when I was a kid in high school and stuff. And and then a couple of years ago, we decided that we'd get into it with our kids, and it's been really good. We've been somewhat successful. I wouldn't say we've been ultimately successful. We're still trying to win it all. But what we'll just go through tonight is some quick, hopefully not too long, pointers and some tips and some guidelines. Um, you know, on standard procedures, but maybe some extra things that we've learned along the way, through our personal experiences. Um, so that's what we'll go through real quickly. So so many times, everyone who I talk to about shows, they want to know what is the secret, right? They want the magic formula. Okay, so here comes the magic formula. Be careful. All right. Number one, you got to start with good housing, which provides the perfect environment for the birds. If the birds experience any stressors, heat stress, cold stress, too much humidity, too much light, too darkness, whatever, they're not going to grow optimally. All right, so we have to have the perfect environment. All right, that's step number one. You got to get your environment ready for the birds, and have that to be just as perfect as you can make it. Number two, you have to have exceptional management, which means lots of hard work. Right. So many people say, the poultry project is the most intensive of all the livestock projects. And for 6 weeks that you're raising chickens, it is. You live, breathe, and sleep chickens for 6 weeks. It's super intensive, but it's shorter. So that's the good side, right? They're gone pretty quick, and so that's another key. All right. Number three, I put on the list is good nutrition. Everyone wants to know the secret magic recipe for mixing the feed just perfectly. It's going to make ultimate grand champions. I don't have any secret formulas. We'll talk about some nutrition things, but there's no magic formulas that I've ever heard of or come up with. Um, and then number four, I say it's just a little bit of luck. You've got to have the birds that the judge likes. Some judges look for different things. And so, never discount a little bit of luck at the show as well. And of course, the luck of did you get the three big birds in your box, right? Uh, I've got two kids, and last year we raised, their birds all in the same pen all together. One was in the top 10, the other was not. Just pure luck, right? It's the luck of the birds that are in the box, and there's sometimes nothing you can do about that. It's kind of the luck of the draw. So hopefully we'll be lucky again this year. We'll see. All right, a little bit on housing, just real quickly. Housing does not need to be fancy. You don't have to build the greatest chicken house in the world. Many people have been very successful raising their poultry in their garages. All right, so I personally wouldn't do that because I don't want to smell chickens every time I open the door to go outside. But some people do it, and they're very successful at it. I guess one advantage is you can, peep out the door from your from your laundry room out into the garage and see the chickens 24 hours a day. So maybe that's an advantage. Turkeys, however, do require a little more substantial housing than chickens. You know, you probably need to have a separate structure for turkeys that's a little bit better built, just because they're bigger birds and they're going to be around for a lot longer. Again, the chicken project is about 6-7 weeks. Turkeys, you know, you're looking at 17, 18 weeks, maybe longer, depending on when your shows are. And again, just like I mentioned in the beginning, housing must provide the best environment for the birds, all right, for maximum growth. That's point number 3 there. Protection from predators is super important. Just remember, everything eats chicken, all right? We've had a lot of people call and they'll tell us, you know, the neighbor's dog or a skunk or a raccoon or something got in their pen and killed all their birds, you know. It happens. So make sure your pen is predator proof. And then, of course, protection from weather extremes, you know. While your housing doesn't have to be super duper perfect, it does need to be adjustable. Sometimes when we're growing these birds, particularly like for the major shows in January and February, we can have drastic extreme weather conditions from almost one moment to the next, right? I mean, it's Texas, you know, it could be 70 degrees and 3 hours later, a cold front blows in and it drops to 40 degrees, you know. So your housing must be adaptable. It's got to be able to change depending on what the weather is doing at all times. So that's important to keep in mind. Okay, here's just a pen we mocked up inside one of our barns at the poultry center. You could build this little pen in your garage and you could raise some chickens. You know, it would be very simple, very cheap to do. So it would be a very inefficient or a very efficient, very cost-effective way to raise your show poultry. You don't have to build an entirely new barn, right? Or if you've got a section of your shop, you know, or whatever building you have, you could raise some birds in a little pen. Again, for turkeys, you want a little more structure. This is an old picture from many years ago, but you know, things don't change really, right? I mean, this would work too. And notice on this one, you can kind of see that they've got a plastic curtain, you know, up here on the upper right side, where they can lower that plastic curtain to, keep blowing rain or cold wind or something off the birds if they need to, you know. So again, housing must be adaptable to the weather. Here's another old picture, right? I don't even know where this picture came from. It's really old, but it's a very simplistic housing design, right? A nice wooden barn. They got some nice concrete footings to keep predators from digging underneath the walls, sloping ground so we have good drainage, nice roof overhangs, you know, got these adjustable windows so we can open and close and let air in if we want to. Just a really nice design, right? So a lot of people will ask, you know, well, do you have plans for the perfect chicken house? No, I don't, okay? Because, what works in Dallas is going to be very different than what works in McAllen, right? Because of different climatology. So you have to build your housing adaptable to your environment, the time of year you're growing birds, and for your style of management, because everyone's going to manage differently. So what I'm just giving you here is some just general broad ideas, and you can adapt or utilize your housing according to your own style and your own climate. Okay, here's someone raising some show chickens in a metal barn. That would work too. A couple suggestions I would make sure to mention with metal buildings is insulation is important, because metal is a good conductor of heat. So that metal barn could turn into an oven in the hot time of the year. So make sure insulation is your friend there. And if I had my choice, I would put the windows down lower, where I can ventilate closer to bird level, particularly when the birds are big, so I can get some air across those birds. And I would drop my stir fan down to about 3 or 4 feet off the ground as well, so that I can get air flowing across those birds to keep them cool. Now, obviously that's for big birds. Little birds, you know, it's the reverse opposite. So again, whatever, you know, works for you and your style of management. Now, what I will mention that is very important when it comes to designing your housing or building your chicken pen in the garage or whatever it is is make sure that you take ventilation into consideration. All right. And ventilation means not temperature control. Ventilation means air exchange. All right. That is what we mean by the word ventilation, that we're going to exchanging air, because the number one function, the most important thing we need ventilation to do is to remove moisture from the pen. We want to make sure that we have the ability to get moisture out of the building and bring in, some fresh air. Because remember, chicken manure is 70% water. So over time, we're going to get this buildup of manure. We're going to get this buildup of humidity in the building, which again is not good for the birds. So from a litter management standpoint, from a bird health standpoint, we want to make sure we have some ventilation. We have the ability to get that moisture out of the building and bring in nice fresh air. All right. Another term I want to throw out that I think is super important is a term we refer to as minimum ventilation. So this just means that at all times of the day, we want to consider how we might do a minimum amount of air exchange, right? A little bit of air exchange to keep that moisture going out and bringing in that fresh air. This is really easy to accomplish with a little fan and a timer. I'll show you a picture here in a minute. And you want to make sure you do this kind of ventilation up high away from the birds, because we don't want to create any drafts across small chicks. So even on day one, when we have small chicks, we need to be thinking about minimum ventilation. Here's how we do it in our chicken barn. I bought a cycle timer. This was a little bit of an investment, but it's a really good timer. And then we just, I bought a little bathroom fan at Lowe's, and did some pretty fancy electrical and wiring there. Don't tell the county, all right, because that's not up to code. But it works, all right. So we just use a simple timer to run this little bathroom fan. This bathroom fan is about 30 CFMs, so 30 cubic feet per minute. So a very, very slight airflow. And just looking at the cycle timer here, this one is a 30-minute timer, and it's got these little metal pins in it. So every pin is 15 minutes of run time. So you can see at this particular picture, I had the timer running 30 seconds every 5 minutes, right? So every 5 minutes, the fan comes on for 30 seconds and just exhausts a little bit of air, right? And then on the other side of the barn, I've got the window cracked and just a little bit of air is coming in, right? Always minimum air exchange, keeping the fresh air coming in, exhausting some moisture, helping to keep the building, nice and well ventilated. So that's always something to consider. You can do it different ways. This is how I like to do it. But always keep that in mind. We want to have some ventilation. Mechanical ventilation would, you can ventilate naturally with just window openings, one window on each side of the barn, and open the windows and allow cross breeze. That's fine. Some days we don't get cross breeze. That's why I like mechanical ventilation, because we can always ensure we've got some ventilation. And when you set up your mechanical ventilation, what you want to do is have the fan, if you notice in that picture, the fan is always pointing out, right? And this creates a negative pressure, kind of a little small vacuum, if you will. And then you allow the air to come in your inlet, somewhere else, either through a window opening or a little, vent you cut in the wall, or whatever it is, right? Some vent opening. And again, you can control that inlet space to control how the air comes into the house, whether you want it to come in fast or slow, high or low. You can make that adjustment based on the age of the birds and the temperatures that you're dealing with, whether it's cold outside, hot outside, whatever that is. But we always recommend that you use where the fan blows the air out rather than blowing it in. That's a better way to do things in a chicken house. And again, if you have questions as we go through this, just holler at me. We'll be happy to stop. Okay, here's again a picture, from our chicken pen. Again, I don't like to spend a lot of money, so I do things on the cheap. Here's a good example. We made this little air duct, this little chute, right? So the window is cracked, Notice we've got small birds down here on the floor, and this is allowing for the cold air, even though it's being ventilated at night when it's cold. We have small birds. What this does is I'm controlling the way that air comes in, and we're making that air go up rather than allowing that cold air to fall down and create a draft on the birds. Okay, so we're making this little air chute so the air, fresh air coming in, goes up, because remember, hot air rises. So we want that cold air to mix with the warm air up high, and we don't create a draft on the birds. Then when the birds get big, we do the opposite. We just turn the vent board over and we actually blow the air down across the birds, because the best way to cool chickens is with airflow. All right. So when you got big birds, they're fully feathered, they're big, and they're eating a lot and they're growing, then we want to get a lot of airflow across those birds to keep them cool. So again, it's all about controlling how the air comes in and goes out. Okay. General guidelines on temperature. And I hate always giving numbers, because people then they want to stare at the thermometer and say, well, everything is good or everything is bad. Well, temperatures are just, guidelines, right? And again, on day one, the most important thing is to look at your litter temperature, because when you put those baby chicks down, their feet are going to be in contact with that litter. And if they step on cold litter, it's going to chill them, right? So you want to have that litter nice and warm, somewhere around 90 degrees when you're placing those day-old chicks. The air temperature is less important. What you really want to focus on when you start out on day one is that litter temperature. You can get these little cheap, infrared temperature guns, and you can actually measure the temperature of the litter under the heat lamp. And that's kind of what you really want to do. And then drop the temperature about 5 degrees each week. That's, again, a ballpark number. What I really say, what I do is I don't look so much at the thermometer. I look at the birds, right? The birds need to be your thermometer, and observe the birds. And if they're eating and drinking and moving around and they look comfortable, then everything is fine. If they're doing things other than that, then maybe things are not fine, right? There's an old picture again, from way back when, but if these birds are huddled up, under the heat lamp and they're all in a big pile, they're cold, right? They need more heat. All right. So let the birds be your indicator. Okay. Here's a picture from our pen on day one. We put those new baby chicks down. Notice they're all spread out, right? You got some on the right side over here eating. You got some in the middle over here drinking. You got some, just laying down around the heat lamp sleeping, right? They're comfortable, right? They're spread out. They're eating, they're drinking, they're sleeping, they're being chicks. That's what you want. Those are good looking chicks. Those are happy chicks. Those are comfortable chicks. So let the birds be your thermometer. Let them tell you what they need. Okay. Typically, the way we keep those birds warm, what is the easiest way and the most efficient, is through the use of very simple incandescent heat lamps. And again, remember, heat lamps don't heat the air. Okay, they heat objects because they use infrared energy. They use infrared heat to heat objects. Keep that in mind. Don't worry so much about the air temperature. Worry about the litter temperature. Make sure the litter is warm. Make sure the chicks are comfortable, and the temperature in the barn is less of a concern. Obviously, you don't want it to be cold, but don't worry if it's not exactly 90 degrees. Because it's probably 90 degrees underneath that heat lamp. Okay. Do be careful with heat lamps, though. Almost, every year we hear of someone who burns their barn down because of the heat lamp, caught the litter on fire. You can see here with this thermal imaging camera picture on the right side there, the spot, the little crosshairs there, that's 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, that heat lamp is way too close to that litter. Okay, so you typically want to keep that heat lamp about, 20, 24 inches from the litter. I think in this picture, this one was about 12 or 14 inches from the litter. And that's just way, way too close. And that litter is way too hot, and if it gets too hot, it can spontaneously combust. So do be careful about heat lamps. And of course, make sure you secure them very well, because if they fall into the litter, that heat lamp, it's a couple hundred degrees, it will catch that litter on fire. So do be careful about that. Speaking of litter, we want to use good quality litter. It's really hard to recommend anything better than good old-fashioned, pine wood shavings. That's really about the standard. Some people like rice hulls. I've heard some people complain that they don't like rice hulls from the standpoint that the birds might eat the rice hulls because they're a smaller particle. It's not going to hurt the birds, but you don't want the birds eating litter. You want the birds eating feed. So rice hulls might not be the best idea. Most people like wood shavings. You can use, sand, but sand typically tends to be a little cold on small chicks. Wood shavings is a better insulator. So that's the preferred litter. I had seen an instance one time here, some neighbors here in town who were doing some show birds called me and they asked me to come look at their birds, and their birds were not doing well. And they had put their birds on some very, very fine sawdust. And I think that was an issue. I think the birds were actually eating the sawdust, and I think they were, having respiratory issues from the sawdust. So, if you do use sawdust, it needs to be a very, very coarse sawdust, not a very, very fine sawdust. So make sure that's a consideration. We want to make sure after about 2 weeks of age that we stir the litter frequently. We don't want to get any caking or manure, slicking over on top of the litter. We want to keep it fluffy and dry and stirred up. And if it does get wet or compacted, we want to clean that litter out and bring in some fresh stuff. Usually over a 6-week grow out period, we end up changing the litter, 2 or 3 times, just depending on, weather conditions and humidity and ventilation and all that kind of good stuff. How much space do your birds need? Our general recommendation is about 2 square foot per broiler up to about 4 weeks of age. After that, they need a little more space. Usually, we accomplish that through culling. We'll talk about culling coming up. But that doesn't mean your pen has to get bigger. It just means you need fewer birds in that pen. And then, of course, turkeys require a little more space. They're bigger birds. And again, we're going to want to cull those as you go to increase space per bird. The one thing I will mention is, again, these are just ballpark numbers, the recommendations. What I will tell you is the more space the birds have, the better off you are. So, if you can make it 3 or 4 square foot per bird at the beginning, that's not a bad thing. The more space you can give them, the better off you're going to be. Drinkers, most people use the good old fashioned, chick drinkers, the little fountain drinkers. Those are fine. Those are really the standard, if you will. And again, these are good for both chickens and turkeys. I will tell you, I like nipple drinkers for starting chicks off. They're cleaner. They're easier to manage. The birds don't crawl in them. They don't poop in them. They don't kick litter in them. So it's much more sanitary. And you can have a much more water capacity with nipple drinkers than with the fountain drinkers. And they take up less space, because basically they don't take up any floor space because they're hanging from the ceiling. So that's why I really like the nipple drinkers to start birds off. And again, this is for broilers, not for turkeys. Turkeys, for some reason, aren't smart enough to use nipple drinkers. So I don't recommend nipples for your turkeys. Now, I will say one of the precautions with nipple drinkers is some of them you can buy, like this water line you see here in the picture, can hook directly to a garden hose for a water supply. If you have any kind of a major leak, that could result in flooding the pen. That we have that happen fairly often at our research farm. That can be kind of a disastrous situation. And of course, make sure your water quality coming in through that hose is a good source. We've had some people who say, something happened to the municipal water supply and a bunch of bad water came in and it killed their chickens. I have heard of that happening. So be careful about automating it from that respect. You can buy these other little kinds of nipple drinkers from, say, Farm Tech catalog. I like these a lot. Again, they're only, about $2 or $3 a piece. They're very inexpensive. You can buy the 5-gallon bucket style ones like you see there in the picture. Or if you just buy these little nipples, what you can do is make a homemade drinker. And someone gave this one to me a number of years ago at a show. And I was like, man, I think this is just a fantastic idea. So I can't claim credit for coming up with it, but I like it a lot. And we use these for our birds quite a bit. This was a little short one, but what you can do is make a longer pipe that holds more water. And that's kind of what we do. Here's a picture of our chicks on day one. And we've got these little nipple drinkers, these little homemade ones scattered throughout the pen. The pipe is about 20 inches long or so, and that'll hold an entire gallon of water. So you can hang multiple of these around the pen, have water available for the birds all over the place, and lots of it, right? I mean, those little chicks are never going to drink all that water. And you don't have to worry about flooding the pen with a hose hooked to a pressurized water supply. So I really like this design for starting chicks off. And it's so easy to start them on it, right? Because the little drop of water hangs on the tip of that nipple. I mean, it's kind of like a little prism just hanging there, and the birds, they're really attracted to it. And when one little bird goes after it, guess what? They all go after it. They just flock to those nipples and start drinking water right away. And that's really important because you want to make sure your birds are getting hydrated on day one. So that's a really good thing, I think, to start birds off.
So Dr. Sufal, on those little waters that you were showing, do they need to actually have their beaks pressed into it or be trained, or will they naturally be attracted to just that water drop?
They'll pretty much naturally be attracted, but what we do is when we put them down, I'll just go over there and I'll take my finger and I'll just tap on that little water nipple. And when you tap on it, it kind of makes like a little metallic clicking sound. And for some reason, that's enough. Man, they hear that little clicking sound and they kind of come over there like, "Ooh, what's that?" And they're gone. I mean, they're on it. So. And once you get one or two of them on it, they go. Yeah.
And then we had another question in the chat box. Will electrolytes corrode the nipple end on those?
No. No, because it's a stainless steel, the metal, the nipple, it's stainless steel. So no, we use electrolytes, and I've used the same nipples for like 5 years now. They don't corrode. No.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great questions. Thanks for bringing those up. I know I want to go fast. I don't want to keep you guys too late, so I'm trying to go fast enough, but I want to cover it all. Another option for automating are these old-fashioned, what we call bell drinkers. You can hook those up to a water supply. Again, I don't particularly recommend these for chickens because if the valve sticks, they can flood the pen. But these might be an option for automating drinkers for turkeys. If you really wanted to go with turkeys and you wanted an automated system, again, I don't recommend nipples for turkeys. So you might go with these bell drinkers for turkeys. And then you can start out, you notice these have the little smaller trough around there for the small birds. Then as the turkeys do get bigger, you want to swap that bell out. You can buy different size bells that the little valve at the top just kind of threads into. Because as the turkeys get big, their heads get really fat, really big, and they have a hard time getting their heads into the small troughs. So you want to get these ones that have the wider lip so they can get their heads in there. And then again, these are what we've used, for turkeys at our research farm for many years. So that's an automated option for turkeys. A lot of people tell me they just use 5-gallon buckets, right? They just put a 5-gallon bucket in the pen and fill it with water, and the turkeys will drink out of that. So, but again, if you want to automate this, this is an option. Okay. So just one more thing about housing I'll mention is you always want to make sure you get your pen set up well in advance. Okay. So this is a picture from, one of our early pens starting out. Again, this is 24 hours before chicks arrive, 24 hours before the birds get there. The litter is down. The heat lamps are on. We're getting that litter nice and warm, because when those birds get there, we don't want to put them on cold litter. All right. We want to have that litter preheated and ready to go well in advance. So that's very important. Okay. One of the other things I think is really important to get your chicks off to a good start is don't give them cold water, right? You know, we always recommend, we tell people, oh, you need to make sure you give them fresh water. And that's true. They always need fresh water. But that does not mean wait till the chicks show up and then run to the faucet in January and get a bunch of cold tap water. All right. Because, you know, if a baby little 40-gram little yellow fuzzball chick drinks cold water, it's going to chill it down. It's going to chill its body temperature. And that's going to be a cold stress to that chick. So what we always do is, you know, whatever water we're going to give to the birds, we fill up our little gallon jugs, you know, and let them sit in the barn, you know, for maybe 12 hours or so to let that water temper to room temperature, because we don't want to give the birds hot water, but we want to give them room temperature water. We don't want to give them cold water that's going to chill those little chicks. Now, the converse of that is when you get big birds at the show, you know, cold water might be a good thing for them, help keep them from heat stressing. So always think about water and water temperature and how that might affect the birds at different ages. Okay, so again, we get everything ready 24 hours in advance. We temper our water, we fill the drinkers, and when the chicks come home, we put them in the pen. And I always ask people when I show this slide, it's like, what don't you see, right? You don't see feed, right? There's no feed out there. I always recommend, I think it's a really good idea to let your birds get water first. All right. A lot of people are like, oh, we got to go. We got to feed. And they throw baby chicks on feed, but those birds are dehydrated, right? They haven't had anything to drink since they hatched. They need water, right? And so water is super important. Remember, birds consume water at a 2-to-1 ratio to feed. So 2 parts water to 1 part feed. If they're not drinking water, they're not eating feed. All right. So we always put the birds down first, let the birds, you know, we observe them and make sure, okay, most of the birds are drinking. Once they all get some water, maybe, you know, 30 minutes or an hour later, then we put the feed down, right? You know, I don't think we've ever lost a show because we didn't feed the birds for the first hour. In fact, I think we've maybe helped us win some shows because we make sure those birds get hydrated, get some water in them, then they eat some feed, and then they can digest that feed. Because if they can't digest it, then it's no good. All right. So let the birds get hydrated, then give them some feed.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
You're not using a brooder ring. Why not?
Well, my pen basically is the brooder ring. You can see it in the corner there behind Thomas. We've got the corner blocked off, and we've got these little plywood dividers. So, you know, those little plywood dividers kind of is our brooder ring. It's not what I guess the old-fashioned, you know, cardboard or metal or whatever in a very, very tight space. I'm not saying you can't use a brooder ring, but I like to give the birds as much space as possible. I've got the heat lamps there. I've got the room, you know, at probably 84, 85, 86 degrees. I don't think they need a brooder ring. And we've been successful without using a brooder ring. You certainly can if you want to. There's nothing wrong with that. And basically what a brooder ring is, if for those who are not familiar with that, it just means a very, very small guard and a small enclosure to keep the birds right up against the heat lamp. My concern with a brooder ring is if the birds do get hot and you've got them too trapped, you've got them too close to those heat lamps, they can't get away, right? So I want to have enough space to where if those birds decide they're too hot, they can migrate away from that heat lamp and go find somewhere cooler to be. So yeah, that's why I don't have a quote brooder ring.
Thank you.
Yep.
Just wondering.
Yep. And again, the picture is a little bit deceptive. I mean, that space is not that big. It's actually pretty small. We use a little plywood there as our shield to keep the birds, what I consider relatively close enough to the heat source. Now notice I don't leave the corners open, because sometimes chicks aren't too smart and they will crawl over there in the corners and cuddle up in a ball in the corner trying to keep warm, and then they're not eating and drinking, and they're not staying warm. So that is something I do. If you notice there behind Thomas in the corners, I block those corners off. I don't want any corners on day one, because sometimes they will do that. Okay. And of course, we like to use these little cardboard egg flats to also put feed down. People use different things, pie tins and different things. I will say I don't like pie tins because they're slick. And if they eat all the feed out, they might slip on that pie tin, and that could cause some leg issues. And I also, so I don't want to put anything slick in the pen. The other thing is, I would say don't use foam egg cartons, because chickens can eat foam, right? These are the cardboard ones. So don't use foam, because they will peck at the foam, and we don't want to fill them up with foam. We want to fill them up with feed. The other thing I'll say about this picture is, do not put the feed directly under the heat lamp. A lot of people say, oh, I'm just going to put the feed right under the heat lamp so they stay warm. They've got feed right there. Well, remember, that heat lamp is making a lot of heat. And what you're doing is you're cooking that feed. And if that feed is hot, they might not want to eat it. And if you cook that feed, you might also destroy some of the vitamins and minerals and things in there. So we always put the feed near the heat, but not right under the heat lamp. Okay, we don't want to cook that feed. Yeah, you don't want the birds have to migrate to a cold spot to get food, but you also don't want to cook that food directly under the heat lamp. Oh, I should have deleted that. Oh, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, as the birds age, you want to raise those nipple drinkers up. That's kind of the same picture there. Now, one thing I will say is, what we found is that birds, as they get bigger, they get lazy. All right, they get to be big, heavy monster birds. They tend to be lazy and don't want to drink out of those nipple drinkers as much. So typically about 3 weeks of age or so, we will put the fountain drinkers in the pen as well. But we'll leave both. We'll have the nipple drinkers, and then we'll put the fountain drinkers in there as well. Because the bigger birds kind of like the fountain drinkers a little more. They'll drink more out of them, I think. And of course, they can also drink sitting down because they're lazy, right? They don't want to get up. So a lot of in the old days, people would say, oh, well, make the bird stand up. That has to be level with the back of the bird. I say no, all right? Because birds are lazy. And if you make them stand up to eat and drink, they might not do it. They might just sit there and say, well, I'm not standing up right now. I'm going to stay sitting. So again, the person who gets the most feed, and therefore also the most water down the neck of that bird, is who's going to have the best birds. So do what you can to make those birds eat and drink all they can. That's what I say.
So how do you monitor to make sure that they're eating and drinking enough as they're growing and getting lazier?
Well, just look at the water level in that drinker, right? So over here on the left, you can see that little black knob there is the cap, right? The water level in there is right at about the level of that cap, right? And then you look on the picture on the right, notice it's quite a bit lower. It's about halfway empty, right? So you can look at how much that water goes down. And the same thing with the nipple drinker. If you use the big pipe, you can look at how much water goes out of that pipe, over a given amount of time. So you can just look at how much water disappears. Is basically all I can say is, look at how much the water goes down. Obviously, if you're using an automated system hooked to a hose, hooked to a pressurized supply, that's a little more difficult to do, a little more difficult to measure. But always just look at how much the level in the drinker is going down. That's how you can basically calibrate, you can calculate how much water they're drinking.
Thank you.
Okay, and same thing for feeders. Keep those low, right? Keep them nice and low where the birds can eat all the time. Yes, they're going to kick a lot of litter in there. You're going to have to clean it out, but hey, that's part of the game. right? As part of the game, you got to get, my kids always get so mad. I say, well, you got to go in there and clean the litter out. They're like, oh, we hate doing that. Well, too bad. All right. Go in there, clean the litter out of the feeders, make sure those birds got fresh feed, make sure they can eat all the time. All right. Because that's the name of the game. All right. And again, you can see these birds here, right? They got plenty, they like the fountain drinkers when they're bigger. They really like these wall feeders, you know, they just line up like hogs at a trough, you know. So, and again, these are very simple. That's just a piece of PVC pipe cut in half and screwed it to the wall. I mean, so a very, very simple feeder. You don't have to spend a lot of money, but you want to have a lot of feed out there for the birds to eat, and you want to have enough feeder space. You don't want issues with feeder competition. You want to have enough space that all the birds can eat at any time that they want to. Okay. And again, as I say, you know, even though we put the bell drinkers in there, you know, later on about 2 or 3 weeks of age, I leave the nipple drinkers in there. And instead of raising them up where the birds have to stand and drink, you can lower them actually back down where the birds can actually drink from those nipple drinkers in a sitting position as well. And so I like to have just lots of water, lots of feed available for the birds, you know, at all times. Real quickly, I'll just mention one thing you can do to judge how good your litter is look at the feet of the birds. All right. These are some birds that we, you know, process. So the feet are cut off, you know, at the end. But the feet on your birds should be perfectly clean. All right. If the feet of your birds have any black scabs or sores or anything on the bottom of their feet, your litter is not clean enough. You need to change that litter out more often. You need to keep it drier. If you've got good, fluffy, dry, clean litter, they should have perfectly looking feet, right? And that's important too, because if their feet are sore and it's going to hurt when they walk, right? And if they can't walk, then they're not going to go to the drinker. They're not going to go to the feeder. So, you know, foot health, I think, is also important. And again, that all relates back to litter quality. Are you keeping the litter, you know, as clean as it should be? Okay, a little quickly on nutrition. I know we almost an hour. I better hurry up here. Remember that birds eat to meet an energy requirement. So make changes according to the age of the birds. All right. Typically, we start birds off at a higher protein feed at the beginning with lower calories. And then as the birds age, that ratio reverses, right? Lower protein, more calories. Bigger birds, bigger bodies need more calories. All right. So we have to make those feed adjustments by the age of the birds. Okay. And again, I don't really know that there's any good secrets to good nutrition. You know, there are a lot of good show feeds out there that have been designed, you know, to give the perfect nutrient balance. And when you go mixing a whole bunch of other stuff with that feed, now you've thrown things out of balance, you know. And I've heard of a lot of people, you know, I had a person call me one time. They're saying, well, you know, we think we've got crop impaction in our broilers, meaning the crop of the bird and the neck gets full of feed and it can't pass. And I'm like, man, I've never seen that with broilers. I'm like, what are you feeding them? They're like, oh, well, we're feeding them show feed, but we're mixing it with rolled oats and we're mixing it with whole, you know, cracked corn and we're mixing it with yogurt and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, I think that's your problem, right? I think you've mixed so much stuff and it sounds like you've mixed in a lot of high fiber components that you're causing this crop, this digestive issue. Okay. So be very, very careful about, you know, some of the fancy recommendations that people make, because they may be, you know, problematic in the end. You know, we've done very, very well. Just feed and feed, right? Just feed and feed. You know, you can do very, very well. So be careful about too many, you know, weird recipes on stuff. You know, and a lot of people ask about additives. And I'm not saying you shouldn't use additives, but more is not always better, right? You know, maybe one additive is good at the recommended rate, but 4 additives, twice the recommended rate, is probably not good. Okay, so just be careful about getting too crazy with too many additives and too many supplements and stuff, because again, you might throw things out of balance. Okay. Not saying you shouldn't do it, just saying be cautious. Okay. Be careful about how you do it. Okay. What's our standard feeding program? You want to start off with a really high protein feed at the beginning. Usually a turkey starter is pretty good. You want to get up there, 28, 30% protein if you can. I usually like to switch around about 10, 11 days of age, give them a little higher protein for the first, 10, 11 days. And then we switch over to a broiler starter. Again, going down in protein a little bit, going to have higher calories. And then about, 2 weeks before the show or so, switch over to a broiler finisher type feed. Okay, very similar program for turkeys. Turkey starter, a little bit lower turkey grower or a broiler starter type feed. Probably around 8 or 10 weeks of age, start that. And then again, about 2-3 weeks before show age, want to switch over to that finisher feed. Because again, that finisher feed is going to have more fat, more calories in it. And that's what we want to get a little finish on those birds right before the show. Now, some people have asked about wet feeding, mixing various liquefied ingredients or fat or something with the feed. I like to do that maybe for the last, 10, 12 days, before the show. I like to use lard just because it's solid at room temperature and it doesn't melt. It doesn't ooze into all of the feed. Usually we like to just top dress it a little, maybe twice a day or so. We usually recommend against milk products. I know a lot of people say they like the powder milk or whatever with the feed. And yes, milk gives you protein. The problem is, though, that milk products also contain lactose. And chickens, of course, are lactose intolerant. They don't normally drink milk. So it might give the birds, some diarrhea issues with milk products. So that's something to consider with that kind of wet feeding. And again, the purpose is just to put something out there that's going to increase feed intake. Because again, the more feed you get these birds to eat, the better off you're going to be. Okay, real quickly on culling. Culling is meaning we're going to reduce the number of birds in the pen. And really, some people say, well, when should I start culling? And I say you should cull all the time. All right, always. If you see, a runty bird, you see a crippled bird, you see one that's just obviously smaller than everyone else, they can go, right? You can cull those at any time. You don't have to wait for a specific time or age. Although by 3 weeks of age, you do want to start removing a good number of birds. We want to start, reducing those smaller birds. And again, you can cull as often as you want or as little as you want. Culling can be a little bit stressful on the birds. So, you don't want to do it too often because then, you're adding more stress to the birds. But what culling does is it allows you to manage the litter better because you've got fewer birds, producing manure. Prevents crowding, gives the birds more space, and just allows the birds to grow better. So culling is important. And again, things you can look for, right? All of these listed here. Any abnormalities, crooked legs, crooked breast, any of those kinds of things. Here's one of our show birds, right? Okay, he's got a crooked keel. You can see how that keel bone looks like a banana. That bird can go. All right, because that's going to be a cull. You don't need to keep that bird any longer. Here's another one we call slab-sided, right? You can see how the breast meat on the left side of that picture is way bigger than the breast muscle on the right side. No good. Not a good bird. You can get rid of that one for sure. So those are definite easy culls, easy defects. You can call those out. And get rid of those at any time that you find them. One thing I will say about culling is it's really faster less stressful on the birds, and you can do a better job if you can hold multiple birds up at a time. You know, it's very difficult for me as a parent to go in there and pick up a bird, feel it, put it down, pick up a bird, feel it, put it down, and go. It's just, you forget, okay, by the 10th one, what did I feel back there? I don't remember, you know. So again, if you can get, you know, some folks to help you hold and get all those birds up at one time where you can really just compare them side by side, it makes that culling process a lot easier for you and a lot less stressful for the birds. And again, what are we looking for? We're looking for, whoops, there should be some text in that box. Sorry about that. That box there should say better bird. I don't know why it doesn't. Formatting issue there, sorry. You know, you're looking for width, right? We're looking for width of that breast meat from front of the breast to the back of the breast. And of course, length. We want length, we want width. We want a big, boxy breast on these birds, okay? If they're skinny or they taper, like the one on the left of the picture, those are culls, right? We don't want those. Okay, and then doing your final selection for the show. You know, again, the main emphasis that we're looking for here is meat. We want lots and lots of meat, the most meat we can get. All right, fleshing. Conformation refers to skeleton. As I mentioned, we want a long keel. We want a deep body bird. We want a big skeleton on this bird. So that's important because the bigger the skeleton, the more meat that's there. And then uniformity is important. It is a factor to consider, but we always say, do not leave your big bird at home. All right. You know, if you leave the big bird at home, uniformly small, ain't going to cut it. All right. So always bring your 3 biggest birds. Will the Grand Champion pen probably be the most uniform? Yeah, because they're the 3 biggest chickens, but they weren't placed there on uniformity. They were placed there because they had 3 big birds. All right. So again, that's what we're looking for, is the most meat. All right, here's just a picture. This is one of our show birds years ago after we processed them. Just want to show you the meat, right? We want to bring the meat, right? And it should look like a big, giant, upside down U or a box, right? You want the width to carry all the way to the back of that bird. That's what you're looking for. If they taper and they're kind of triangular shaped, or what people call heart shaped, those are going to have less meat. Those are going to place lower, right? So we're looking for those big, meaty, boxy birds. Okay, here's a good example. Grand Champion pen, right? You process those birds and look at there. They're all 3 fairly uniform. They're big and wide. They're long. They carry you all the way to the back. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for 3 big old, I call them turtle shells, right? They look like a big old turtle. They're just big and round and humped up with meat. That's what you're looking for. Okay, and then selection of turkeys, same principle, right? Conformation, that means skeleton, length, width, and fleshing. Lots and lots of meat that carries all the way to the back. Obviously, uniformity is not a factor because you're only showing 1 chicken. I'm sorry, 1 turkey. And of course, finish is fat cover. You want a little bit of fat cover, but it's not the main criteria. We're looking for as much meat on those birds as we can find. And then quickly to wrap it up here, because I know we're at an hour, so we want to stay on time. When we wingman the birds, and again, I think in most cases, you know, you're going to be getting your birds through our department for the majors and even probably for your county shows. We're going to wingman those, and we really always try to make sure we crimp those bands. We pinch them in the middle just a little bit. It prevents that wing band from wrapping around the wing. So what's important is that after about a week, you spread those wing bands back out because notice how narrow this wing band is on the top of the picture. That's not a lot of room for the skin of that bird to grow. So we want to spread that wing band out a little bit to make sure that that skin can grow and doesn't become ingrown. We see lots of ingrown wing bands coming back to the show, and they're all infected and looking terrible. You know, and you ask people, why didn't you spread the wing bands? They say, oh, well, I didn't want to because I was scared I was going to pop the rivet. if you're popping the rivet, you're getting way too crazy with those wing bands. Okay. You know, I've spread wing bands here. I'm just using my pocket knife, you know, and I'm kind of giving it a little twist and spreading that wing band open on those chicks. You know, I've spread our kids' wing bands, thousands of birds already, and I've never popped one. Okay. So if you're popping the rivet, you might be getting a little crazy with the spreading. You don't have to spread them out to a great big giant circle. You just have to open them just enough to make sure that skin on that wing can grow, right, and not become embedded and infected and stuff. And if you do that, you won't have any problems with those wing bands. All right. So very important to always make sure people are just making sure those wing bands are spread open just a little bit. Again, it's kind of a bird welfare issue as well. Okay. And make sure you always hold the birds up for the judge, right? You know, it's tough as a judge to try to judge birds down at waist level, all right? You know, so these girls here in the picture, they're doing a great job, right? They got those birds right up there, you know, where the judge can get a good view of them, get a good feel of them, and really assess those birds well. So with that, we're at an hour, so I better be quiet. Any more questions that I did not address? I'm sure you've got something that I didn't cover, but with limited time, we try to cover as much ground as possible.
So I have a quick question. So whenever these birds are growing and everything, is there any major health concerns that exhibitors should be watching out for, just in general from chick and then as they get larger? I know we talked a little bit about heat stressing earlier, but.
You know, I've never really experienced any health issues, you know, myself. I know I have heard some people have some issues, you know, with bacterial infections and things like that. You know, I've just never really run into any of those kinds of issues myself. Again, most of your bacterial issues are either going to be, you know, hatchery related in the chicks themselves, or they're going to come from dirty litter, right? You know, or, you know, maybe if you've given them something weird in the feed, you know, but if you have good, clean litter, if you give them good quality feed, you know, there really shouldn't be anything to worry about. You know, with commercial broilers or even yard chickens, you know, sometimes we worry about coccidiosis, which is an intestinal disease of the birds. But again, if you're putting these birds in a pen that was very, very clean, well disinfected before you put the litter down, and then you put down fresh litter and you change that litter, you know, at least every 2 or 3 weeks, at least once during the grow out period, coccidiosis should not be an issue. Coccidiosis comes from the birds being in contact with fecal material that's contaminated, or the ground or dirt or something like that. So, you know, I've never run into a cocci issue with show broilers. And again, the only other, you know, health issue that I would caution against is with turkeys. I didn't mention that. You may want to consider fowlpox vaccination of turkeys, because turkeys are going to be around a long time, and fowlpox is a virus that is spread by mosquitoes, and fowlpox is kind of native, it's kind of endemic to wild birds. So if mosquitoes go bite a wild bird and they pick up the virus and they come fly over here and bite your birds, they can transmit fowlpox. And I hear a lot of cases of fowlpox in backyard chickens all the time, you know, in those birds that are around for a long time. I've never, crossed my fingers, you know, say never. I've never heard of fowlpox so far in broilers, just because they're not around that long, and a lot of times we're growing them in wintertime, you know, January, February, March, you know, for the major shows and spring shows. Don't have a lot of mosquitoes usually around those time of the year, so we don't usually see a lot of. I've never really seen or heard of any fowlpox issues in broilers, but it's something to consider with turkeys, just because they're around for so long, and turkeys are very, very susceptible to fowlpox. So that's something to consider with turkeys.
Dr. Sufal, with your ventilation, do you let that air exhaust out? I mean, you're trying to draw it in from the outside and then let it exhaust out.
Mm-hmm. Yes. My fans are always pointing out of the building. So basically they're sucking the air out of the building, which causes the air to naturally come in wherever my inlet opening is, the window or, whatever hole, I've cut in the wall to allow the air to come in. Because then I can control how that air comes in. I can make that inlet at the top of the ceiling. I can make it at bird level. I can create a foam chute to shoot it upward. I can make the air go wherever I want it to.
What's your thoughts on air conditioning also when it gets really hot?
Okay, great. I'm glad you brought that up. I was trying to keep the PowerPoint short. I didn't want to go too long. I always try to avoid air conditioning at all costs. I'll have my big fans running wide open, doing everything I can with air movement and ventilation to try to keep the birds cool. But I will say, sometimes in March, April, if you've got those late spring shows, if it does get hot and you do not want to let those big birds heat stress, because if they heat stress, they will not eat. And if they don't eat, they're not growing. They're not putting on weight. So I run maximum ventilation to keep the birds cool to the point of panting. If I start to see one bird start to open its mouth and pant, meaning it's going to start breathing hard because it's getting hot, then the AC has to come on. You got to use the AC because you do not, I would rather take a chance on using AC and getting the birds, acclimated to AC rather than letting them heat stress. So that's kind of my program on AC. I use it as a last resort, but if it comes down to it, I use it because I do not want those birds to ever heat stress.
Okay, I agree with you on that. I think that I know there's a lot of people that just think that you have to have an air conditioner in the chicken house, but I think if you've got enough airflow in there to be able to keep those birds cool and only use that as a last resort, that's better. Because to me, if you walk in an air conditioned chicken house, the air quality in there is not good. It's stuffy, or you
don't have any ventilation.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And you can tell it when you walk in. So
yeah, no. And again, I will only use AC when I have to, and we will use it until the sun goes down, the air temperature outside cools off. And once that air temperature cools off outside where I can turn them fans back on, then I get rid of the AC and I put the fans back on because I want to maximize air exchange. And again, the issue with AC is really, to me, it boils down to acclimation of the birds to the air conditioning because a lot of our shows like San Antonio and Austin and many of the county shows perhaps don't have air conditioned buildings. Yes, Houston is an air conditioned building, but the other shows are not. And if your birds are acclimated to AC, they're not used to any kind of slightly warmer temperatures whatsoever or slightly increased humidity levels whatsoever because they've been in this perfect air conditioned environment their entire lives. And then you go to the show, those birds could heat stress big time at the show. And if they die before they get in the ring, then you've got trouble. You've got problems. Some shows will let you show, some won't. So that's why I minimize air AC also, is because I don't want to create a situation where the birds are going to heat stress at the show. That's not air conditioned and they end up dying on me.
thank you very much.
Mellanie got booted off. So I guess I'm going to give her a few more minutes to get back on. I don't have any questions. Miss Bauer, do you have any more questions?
No, I don't think so.
I'm sorry, I didn't have the ability. I wasn't watching the chat there during the whole thing, but I think we answered all the questions, right?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, I appreciate the invitation and hope it was helpful. And, we're also about to release our market poultry workshop video series. All right, it's going to be pretty cool. It's going to be on D2L. And basically it's going to be our normal kind of day-long market poultry workshop programs. There's going to be I think 7 or 8 videos going into much more detail than what we covered here in an hour tonight. So we'll have that coming out hopefully in the next week or two. And people will be able to view that on the extension system. And then we're also going to try to rig up a Zoom Q&A to go along with that at a later date. So, if your folks are interested in that coming up, well, we're going to have that as well in the next week or two.
Well, that's great. We really appreciate you taking the time and talk to us tonight. That was a fantastic presentation.
Oh, well, thank you.
I know, thank you so much. I always tend to learn a lot with poultry since that's not my strong suit. So we really, really appreciate it.
Great. Well, I hope I said everything correctly and hopefully didn't steer you wrong. And again, a lot of the stuff is opinion. A lot of it is my opinion. And some people will say, well, we do it differently and we always win the show. And you know what? That's great, man. If you win the show with what you're doing, no problem. No problem at all. My way is not the only way. So I just give you the recommendations that I think it works for us and is successful for us personally. So everyone's different. Everyone can do it their own way.
All right. Well, thank you so much again. We really appreciate y'all's time. If y'all have any other questions or anything, just let us know and we'll be sure to forward them on to Dr. Sufal. And other than that, have a great evening, y'all.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.